March 17, 1945. 250 feet below the Pacific Ocean. The depth charge detonates 40 feet from the USS Barb's hull, and the explosion tears through the water like the fist of an angry god. Steel screams. Rivets pop. A sailor's skull cracks against a valve wheel, and blood sprays across the bulkhead in a crimson arc. The lights die, plunging 78 men into darkness so complete you can't see your hand in front of your face. Then the emergency lamps flicker on, bathing everything in blood-red light that makes the fear on every face look like a death mask. Another explosion. Closer this time. The submarine lurches sideways and men slam into equipment with sickening thuds. Paint chips rain from the ceiling like toxic snow. Someone screams. Someone else tells him to shut the hell up because noise means death, and they're all about to die anyway. This is how the Pacific War kills submariners. Not with bullets or fire or anything clean. It kills them slowly, methodically, with Japanese depth charges that pound and pound until your boat cracks open like an egg and the ocean rushes in to crush your lungs and fill your screaming mouth with salt water. The U.S. Navy has lost 52 submarines since 1941. Over 3,600 men at the bottom of the ocean. Most of them died exactly like this, trapped in a steel coffin while sonar tracked their every move, and depth charges walked closer and closer until one finally found its mark. But here's what nobody knows yet. Not the Japanese destroyer captain up there circling for the kill. Not Commander Eugene Fluckey, gripping the periscope housing with white knuckles. Not the 77 veteran sailors waiting to die. The solution to their problem is sitting in the forward torpedo room right now, hunched over a bucket, vomiting his guts out. He's 16 years old. He lied about his age to get here. He forged his dead brother's papers. And in exactly 12 minutes, his idea is going to save every single life on this submarine and change naval warfare forever. His name is Bobby Decker, and this is the story of how a teenager's seasickness accidentally defeated the deadliest submarine hunting technology of World War II. Let me take you back to understand how we got here. Because this story doesn't start with depth charges or submarines or even the Pacific War. It starts with a fundamental problem that was killing Allied submariners by the hundreds. The problem was sonar. Active sonar worked like this. Japanese destroyers sent pulses of sound through the water. When those pulses hit something solid, like a steel submarine, they bounced back as echoes. The sonar operator listened to those echoes, calculated distance and direction, and told his captain exactly where to drop depth charges. Simple physics, deadly effective, completely impossible to defeat. American submarine commanders tried everything. They dived deep, hiding beneath temperature layers where sonar signals bent and scattered. They shut down every system, going to absolute silent running, where men didn't even whisper. They released oil and debris to fake being sunk, hoping destroyers would give up and leave. None of it worked reliably. Once sonar contact was established, your survival came down to luck. And luck always runs out, eventually. Between 1941 and 1945, Japanese depth charges sank 42 American submarines. That's one boat every 5 weeks. Each boat carried 60 to 80 men. Do the math. It's a massacre. The Germans had something called bold. Metal canisters filled with calcium hydride that produced massive clouds of bubbles when ejected from U-boats. The bubbles created false echoes that confused Allied sonar. American intelligence knew about bold. They'd recovered canisters from sunken U-boats. They understood exactly how it worked. But bold required special equipment, chemical manufacturing, submarine modifications, and time. Time that boats dying right now in the Pacific didn't have. The Bureau of Ships promised development would begin after the European War ended. After. Always after. While submariners died now. This is the world Bobby Decker walked into when he lied his way into the Navy in December 1944. Born April 1928 in Galveston, Texas. Youngest of 3 brothers. His oldest brother, Michael, died on Omaha Beach 6 months earlier, shot through the chest by German machine gun fire while trying to clear a bunker. Bobby held Michael's funeral letter in his hands and decided he was done with high school, done with staying safe while the world burned, done with being the little brother who stayed home. He had Michael's birth certificate. He had steady hands and a forger's patience. He walked into a Navy recruiting station with confidence he didn't feel, and papers that looked legitimate enough to fool a recruiter with a quota to meet. December 3rd, 1944. James Robert Decker raised his right hand and swore to defend the Constitution. The recruiter never asked why a 20-year-old man looked so young. Bobby never volunteered the truth. The Navy assigned him to submarine duty because the submarine service desperately needed bodies. They were losing boats faster than they could replace them. Training standards dropped. Experience requirements relaxed. If you could pass basic submarine school without drowning yourself or your crewmates, you were qualified. Bobby got 8 weeks at New London, Connecticut. Just enough time to learn which valve does what, how to recognize flooding, and the basic knowledge that would maybe keep everyone alive. He couldn't grow a proper beard. He got seasick during training exercises in calm water. The instructors looked at this baby-faced kid and wondered how long he'd last in combat. Then they shipped him to Pearl Harbor and assigned him to USS Barb as a torpedo room striker, which was basically the lowest possible job. He loaded torpedoes. He cleaned equipment. He did whatever the veteran torpedo men told him to do. And he spent the first 2 weeks of every patrol throwing up into buckets while everyone else tried to ignore him. The USS Barb wasn't just any submarine. Under Commander Eugene Fluckey's command since May 1944, she'd become one of the deadliest hunters in the Pacific Fleet. 17 enemy ships sunk. Nearly 97,000 tons sent to the bottom. 3 Navy crosses on Fluckey's chest, and a reputation for throwing out the rule book. Fluckey attacked on the surface like a torpedo boat instead of waiting submerged. He used speed and aggression instead of caution. He took risks that made senior officers nervous, and his crew simultaneously terrified and absolutely confident they'd make it home alive. When Barb departed Pearl Harbor in early March 1945 for her 10th War Patrol, the mission brief was simple. Hunt shipping lanes off Sakhalin Island, sink everything that moves, try not to die. By March 17th, they'd already sunk 3 cargo ships and were stalking a convoy when everything went catastrophically wrong. A Japanese patrol plane spotted their periscope. Just a glimpse, maybe 2 seconds of the lens breaking the surface. But 2 seconds was enough. The plane radioed the destroyer Ukuru, and suddenly the hunter became the hunted. Fluckey crash-dived to 250 feet and went to silent running. Every non-essential system shut down. Men moved in slow motion. The crew barely breathed. And they prayed the Japanese sonar operator would lose them in the dark water. He didn't lose them. The Ukuru's sonar operator was good. He tracked Barb's every move with precision that made Fluckey's blood run cold. The first depth charge pattern bracketed them perfectly. 5 charges detonated in a sequence designed to catch submarines trying to evade. One exploded close enough to crack battery cells, releasing chlorine gas into the air. Another damaged the starboard propeller, reducing their underwater speed to a crawl. Now they couldn't run, couldn't fight, could barely move without making enough noise for sonar to pinpoint them exactly. Bobby Decker sat in the forward torpedo room, hunched over his bucket, vomiting again. Fear and seasickness combined into a misery that made him wish for death just to end the nausea. But death was coming anyway. He could hear the Ukuru sonar through the hull. Ping, ping, ping. Each pulse a countdown, each echo bringing more depth charges. He threw up again and watched bubbles form in the mess. Watched them rise, watched them expand and create patterns that distorted the water around them. And Bobby's oxygen-deprived, terrified teenage brain made a connection that every submarine expert in the entire United States Navy had somehow missed. Bubbles reflect sound. Bubbles create false echoes. What if they could make bubbles on purpose? What if they could release compressed air outside the hull? Create a cloud that would confuse sonar? Make the Japanese think the submarine was somewhere it wasn't. The idea seemed insane. Bobby had been on the boat for 3 months. He was the youngest person by 4 years. He was a striker, the lowest rank, the kid everyone ignored. Who was he to interrupt the command crew during combat with a crazy theory about bubbles? But another depth charge exploded, and the submarine shuddered, and Bobby realized they were dead anyway. Might as well die trying something instead of just waiting for the killing blow. He stumbled to the control room, where Flucky and his officers hunched over charts. Breaking protocol, breaking probably a dozen regulations. Lieutenant Commander Paul Summers looked at him like he'd lost his mind and started to order him back to his station. But Flucky held up his hand. Flucky hadn't become the most successful submarine commander by ignoring ideas, even crazy ones from kids. He asked Bobby to explain, and Bobby talked about bubbles and sonar, and using compressed air systems with modified valves, and as he talked, Flucky's expression changed. The idea was desperate, untested, completely improvised. But they were out of time and out of options. Flucky turned to his chief engineer. "Can we rig something up?" The chief thought for maybe 30 seconds. "We can jury-rig an air release valve with a diffuser plate. Might work. Might kill us faster." Flucky made the command decision. Do it. They had 15 minutes before the next depth charge pattern. The engineers worked at frantic speed, pulling parts from the trim system, welding a perforated plate, running new lines to a manual valve. And this is where part 1 ends, with everything hanging in the balance. Will Bobby's crazy idea actually work, or will it just make them easier to kill? In part 2, we'll see the bubble decoy tested in combat for the first time. Watch the Japanese destroyer captain's confusion as his sonar starts tracking ghosts. And discover how this improvised system spreads through the entire Pacific submarine fleet. Because what happens next doesn't just save 78 men on the Barb. It saves thousands of submariners over the next 80 years. Stay tuned. 15 minutes ago, a 16-year-old kid with vomit on his shirt convinced Commander Eugene Flucky to try the most desperate, untested, completely insane idea in submarine warfare history. Release compressed air to create bubbles that might confuse Japanese sonar. Might save 78 lives, or might just make them die faster. The engineers rigged the system. The valve is ready. And now comes the moment where theory meets reality, and everyone discovers if Bobby Decker is a genius or just a scared kid who's about to kill his entire crew. Here's what makes this moment terrifying. Between December 1944 and March 1945, the U.S. Navy lost 9 submarines. That's one boat every 10 days. 540 men drowned, crushed, or burned alive. Every single loss followed the same pattern. Japanese sonar locked on. Depth charges walked closer. The submarine tried standard evasion tactics, and those tactics failed. The Navy had procedures, manuals, decades of experience, and none of it was working. Now Bobby's suggesting they throw away the manual and trust bubbles. Bubbles. The same thing kids blow in bathwater. Flucky gives the order. Turn hard to port. Release the bubble curtain from starboard. Create the illusion that Barb is continuing on her original course while the real boat turns away. The chief engineer grabs the jury-rigged valve. His hands are shaking. Not from fear, though he's terrified. From the constant concussions of depth charges that have been pounding them for 40 minutes. He opens the valve. Compressed air screams through the diffuser plate and explodes into the water outside the hull. Inside the boat, everyone holds their breath. Not because Flucky ordered silence, because 78 men are simultaneously praying to God, Buddha, their mothers, anyone who might be listening. Above them, the Ukuru sonar operator hears the echo shift. Target bearing 270 degrees, range 400 meters, depth 75 meters, moving east. He reports the contact with absolute confidence. The destroyer captain orders a full pattern. 5 depth charges set to detonate at 250 feet. The charges drop. They sink. They explode in a sequence that would tear the Barb apart if she was actually there. But she's not there. The real submarine is 300 yards away, turning silently at minimum speed, while Japanese depth charges pound water and bubbles and nothing else. Bobby Decker presses his face against the cold steel hull and listens to the explosions that should be killing him. That would be killing him if his crazy idea hadn't worked. He wants to laugh. He wants to cry. He wants to vomit again, but his stomach is already empty. Flucky doesn't celebrate. Not yet. One successful evasion proves nothing. The Ukuru is still hunting, still pinging, still dangerous. He orders another bubble release to reinforce the decoy. Another course change. Another bubble cloud. Playing a deadly game of misdirection that keeps the destroyer chasing ghosts, while Barb slips away, degree by degree. For 40 minutes they run this pattern. Bubble release, course change, silent running, bubble release. The Ukuru drops 18 depth charges on false contacts. 18 charges that should have killed them. 18 charges wasted on bubbles that a 16-year-old kid thought of while throwing up. Finally, the Ukuru gives up. The destroyer heads back to port. Her depth charge racks empty. Her captain furious and confused because his sonar operator swears they had solid contacts, but nothing died. The Barb surfaces that night to recharge batteries. Flucky calls Bobby to the bridge and asks him how he thought of it. Bobby explains about being seasick, about watching bubbles rise, about air and water working together to confuse things. Flucky starts laughing. Not mockery. Pure relief mixed with disbelief that the solution to a problem killing thousands of submariners came from a teenager watching his own vomit. But here's where the real fight begins. Because surviving one depth charge attack is luck. Proving the system works is something else entirely. And convincing the United States Navy to adopt a tactic invented by a 16-year-old liar during combat? That's impossible. April 3rd, 1945. USS Barb arrives at Pearl Harbor. Flucky files his patrol report, including full technical specifications of the bubble decoy system. He credits Torpedo Man striker James Robert Decker with the innovation. He includes timestamps, sonar recordings, estimated positions of all 18 depth charges. He recommends immediate fleet-wide adoption. The report goes to Commander Submarine Force Pacific, then to the Bureau of Ships, then to some admiral's desk where it sits for 3 weeks while bureaucrats argue about procedures. The man who becomes Bobby's enemy isn't Japanese. He's Rear Admiral Theodore Roscoe, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Undersea Warfare. 30 years in the Navy. Survivor of 3 surface actions in World War I. Designer of the Mark 14 torpedo guidance system. A man whose entire identity is built on experience, regulations, and the absolute certainty that submarine tactics are developed by experts in laboratories, not by teenage strikers during combat. May 1st, 1945. Flucky gets summoned to a conference room at Pearl Harbor, where Roscoe is waiting with 4 other senior officers. The Admiral looks at Flucky's report like it's something his dog dragged in. "Commander, this bubble system, you're telling me it works because a 16-year-old got seasick?" His voice drips with contempt. Flucky stands his ground. "Sir, it works because the physics are sound. Age is irrelevant." "Age is extremely relevant when that age is 16, and that sailor shouldn't be on your boat." Roscoe drops a folder on the table. "We ran Decker's enlistment papers through verification. Born April 1928. He forged documents, committed fraud, and you're recommending we adopt tactical innovations from a criminal child?" The room goes quiet. Flucky realizes this isn't about the bubble system. It's about authority. About admitting that decades of submarine doctrine missed something obvious. About the embarrassment that a kid thought of something experts didn't. "Sir, with respect, 8 submarines have been lost to depth charge attacks since January. That's 480 men dead. If this system saves even 1 boat, if," Roscoe cuts him off, "based on 1 engagement, 1 untested field modification. You want me to order fleet-wide installation based on 1 example?" He leans forward. "Commander, do you know how many ridiculous innovations get proposed during war? Soldiers suggest attaching bayonets to rifles backwards so they can stab behind them. Pilots suggest flying planes upside down to confuse enemy fighters. And submariners, apparently, suggest we blow bubbles at the Japanese." The other officers laugh. Polite, uncomfortable laughter that tells Flucky exactly how this is going to end. But Flucky has 1 card left to play. "Sir, I request permission to conduct official trials. Controlled environment, multiple test runs. Let me prove it works." Roscoe studies him. "You have 3 days to prepare. 1 test. If your bubble system fails, this conversation never happened, and you never mention it again. And Decker gets discharged for fraudulent enlistment. 3 days. 1 chance. Everything riding on whether physics and luck can cooperate 1 more time." Flucky walks out of that conference room knowing he'd just bet Bobby's future and possibly hundreds of lives on a system that worked exactly once under combat conditions. But here's what Roscoe doesn't know. Flucky isn't alone. Captain Richard O'Kane, commander of USS Tang and the 2nd highest-scoring submarine ace in the Pacific, heard about the bubble system through unofficial channels. O'Kane lost 31 men when Japanese depth charges sank USS Wahoo in 1943. He was executive officer on that boat. He watched friends die because they had no defense against sonar. And when he hears about Bobby's innovation, he doesn't see a kid's crazy idea. He sees the answer to a question that's haunted him for 2 years. May 3rd, 1945. O'Kane shows up at Pearl Harbor unannounced and requests to observe the trials. Then Commander Dudley Morton arrives. Then Lieutenant Commander Sam Dealey. 5 submarine captains, collectively responsible for sinking 89 Japanese ships, all demanding to see if this bubble system is real. Roscoe can't refuse them. The trials are no longer a quiet test to debunk Flucky's report. They're a public demonstration with witnesses who have more combat experience than anyone in the room. May 4th, 1945, 0600 hours. USS Barb submerges in the waters off Oahu, with Roscoe and 6 senior officers aboard as observers. The test protocol is brutal. A destroyer will hunt Barb using active sonar for 2 hours. Standard evasion tactics only for the first hour. Bubble system allowed for the second hour. Success means evading long enough to surface safely. Failure means proving Roscoe right and ending Bobby's Navy career. The destroyer is USS Dale, a veteran anti-submarine warfare ship that's sunk 3 Japanese submarines and damaged 2 others. Her sonar crew are the best in the Pacific Fleet. They're not going easy on Barb just because this is a test. They want to prove they can find any submarine, bubbles or no bubbles. First hour. Standard tactics. Flucky goes deep, changes course, hides beneath temperature layers. Dale's sonar finds him every single time. Within 30 minutes, Dale's captain has locked 6 simulated depth charge solutions that would have sunk the Barb. Roscoe is smiling. The other observers are taking notes. Bobby Decker sits in the torpedo room, watching his future evaporate. Hour 2. Flucky releases the first bubble curtain. The effect is immediate and dramatic. Dale's sonar operator reports solid contact bearing 180 degrees. The destroyer turns to pursue. But Barb has already turned 90 degrees and released another bubble cloud. Dale's sonar now reports 2 contacts in different locations. The operator sounds confused. "Sir, I have multiple solid returns. Target appears to be in 2 places simultaneously." For 45 minutes, Flucky runs the pattern Bobby invented under combat conditions. Bubble release, course change, silent running, bubble release. Dale drops 12 simulated depth charges. 0 hits the actual submarine. Every single charge targets a bubble cloud that the destroyer's sonar reads as a solid metal object. Finally, Dale's captain radios that he's lost contact and cannot re-establish. Barb surfaces. The observers climb up to the bridge. Roscoe's face is white. O'Kane is grinning like he just won the lottery. The test results are irrefutable. Standard tactics, 6 hits in 30 minutes. Bubble system, 0 hits in 45 minutes. The math is devastating for anyone who wants to deny this works. But Roscoe tries anyway. One test, ideal conditions. Real combat is different. O'Kane steps forward. "Admiral, with respect, I'm taking this system to sea on my next patrol, with or without official authorization. And I'll bet my boat that it works in real combat, because the physics don't change." That breaks the dam. All 5 submarine captains request immediate installation of bubble systems on their boats. They're not asking permission. They're informing Roscoe that this is happening whether he approves or not. The Admiral realizes he's lost. Not to Flucky, not to Bobby. To simple physics and desperate captains who will try anything to bring their crews home alive. May 15th, 1945. The Bureau of Ships issues Technical Order 47B, authorizing installation of compressed air bubble decoy systems on all Pacific Fleet submarines. Production begins immediately. Training protocols are established, and Bobby Decker, the 16-year-old who accidentally revolutionized submarine warfare, gets transferred to submarine school as an instructor. Not discharged. Not court-martialed for fraudulent enlistment. Promoted to teach veteran submariners the system he invented while vomiting. By June 1945, 23 submarines have the bubble system installed. By July, 47 boats. The results are staggering. Between May and August 1945, U.S. submarines survived 34 depth-charge attacks with 0 losses. Compare that to January through April 1945. 9 submarines lost. The bubble system doesn't just save lives. It completely shifts the tactical balance in the Pacific. But here's what nobody realizes yet. Japanese naval intelligence has noticed something strange. American submarines are escaping attacks that should be killing them. Sonar contacts are multiplying. Depth charges are missing. And Tokyo is starting to ask questions that are going to make Bobby's innovation even more valuable and more dangerous than anyone imagined. Because when the enemy figures out you have a new weapon, they don't just accept defeat. They adapt. They counter. They hunt for weaknesses in your system. And in Part 3, we're going to see what happens when Japanese anti-submarine tactics evolve specifically to defeat the bubble decoy. When Bobby's elegant solution meets enemy ingenuity. When physics and warfare collide in ways that will determine whether this teenage innovation saves the submarine fleet or becomes its most dangerous vulnerability. The war isn't over. The real test is just beginning. 2 months ago, a seasick teenager invented a weapon that shouldn't work. 1 month ago, the U.S. Navy proved it does work. 3 weeks ago, 47 submarines got equipped with bubble decoy systems. And yesterday, Japanese naval intelligence finished analyzing why American submarines keep escaping attacks that should kill them. The answer terrifies Tokyo. Because if the Americans have defeated sonar, then the entire Japanese anti-submarine warfare doctrine is obsolete. And 200 destroyers, 500 sonar operators, and thousands of depth charges are suddenly useless against an enemy that can disappear into clouds of bubbles. Here are the numbers that make Japanese admirals lose sleep. May 1945. U.S. submarines survive 11 depth charge attacks, 0 losses. June 1945. 14 attacks survived, 0 losses. July 1945. 9 attacks survived, 0 losses. Compare that to the first 4 months of 1945, when 9 submarines died. The math is brutal and obvious. American submarines have become unkillable. And Tokyo needs answers immediately. July 15, 1945. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters convenes an emergency conference on submarine countermeasures. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome chairs the meeting. The man is furious. His destroyers are dropping depth charges on ghost contacts. His sonar operators report solid targets that vanish. His anti-submarine warfare doctrine, developed over 4 years and tested in 200 engagements, is failing catastrophically. Gentlemen, we are losing the undersea war. Not because their submarines are better, because they have learned to deceive our sonar, and we must adapt or surrender the Pacific. Japanese engineers study recovered sonar recordings. They identify the signature pattern of bubble clouds, high-frequency scatter, multiple false returns, contacts that drift with currents instead of maintaining submarine speed. The solution seems obvious. Modify sonar protocols to distinguish bubbles from steel. Train operators to recognize false echoes. Develop new depth charge patterns that bracket both the decoy and probable escape routes. It's a good plan, a logical plan, but it requires time to implement. And time is the one thing Japan doesn't have. Because while Tokyo is analyzing recordings and writing new procedures, American submarines are hunting with absolute impunity. USS Barb sinks 4 cargo ships in 1 week. USS Archerfish stalks Japanese destroyers that used to hunt her. USS Finback penetrates Tokyo Bay itself and surfaces to fire rockets at industrial targets. The submarine fleet isn't just surviving anymore, it's dominating. and Bobby Decker's innovation is the reason why. But here's what nobody anticipated. Success creates its own problems. By August 1945, every submarine in the Pacific Fleet has bubble decoy systems installed, and every single one of those systems is running on compressed air reserves designed for ballast adjustments, not continuous tactical deployment. The math is simple and devastating. Each bubble release consumes 200 cubic feet of compressed air. Each submarine carries 6,000 cubic feet of reserve air. 30 releases, and you're empty. No air for ballast. No air for surfacing. No air to breathe if something goes wrong. August 3, 1945. USS Pipefish encounters this problem the hard way. Commander Thomas Hogan evades a destroyer using 7 bubble releases over 90 minutes. Textbook execution. Perfect results. The destroyer gives up and leaves. Pipefish starts to surface for battery recharge, and the ballast tanks don't respond because the compressed air system is completely depleted. The submarine sinks to 400 feet, past crush depth, while Hogan desperately tries to blow tanks with residual pressure. They survive by emergency surfacing using main ballast blow, but the boat takes damage and barely makes it back to Midway. The near loss of Pipefish triggers panic, because if submarines can't surface after using bubble decoys, then Bobby's innovation isn't a weapon. It's a death trap that trades depth-charge survival for suffocation or crushing. Commander Submarine Force Pacific immediately issues restrictions. Maximum 4 bubble releases per patrol. Conserve air reserves. If you exceed 4 releases, abort mission and return to base immediately. The restrictions spark furious debate. Submarine captains argue they need unlimited releases to survive increasingly aggressive Japanese anti-submarine patrols. Engineers counter that unlimited use will kill boats through air depletion before depth charges ever get a chance. Bobby Decker, now a chief instructor at Pearl Harbor Submarine School, proposes modifying air compressor systems to recharge while submerged. But submarine compressors are loud, require massive power, and would make boats vulnerable to sonar detection. There's no good solution, only trade-offs between different ways to die. And that's when everything changes. Because August 6, 1945, USS Indianapolis delivers a weapon that makes submarines, depth charges, and Bobby's bubble decoys simultaneously critical and obsolete. The atomic bomb drops on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki burns, and suddenly, the war everyone thought would last another year might end in weeks. But Japan hasn't surrendered yet, and American submarines are still hunting, still fighting, still needing bubble decoys to survive. Until one final mission proves exactly how valuable Bobby's innovation really is. August 12, 1945. USS Torsk receives orders for what might be the last submarine patrol of World War II. The mission is simple and suicidal. Penetrate the Sea of Japan through the Tsushima Strait, hunt enemy coastal shipping, survive long enough to confirm that Japan is preparing for surrender or planning final resistance. Commander Benton Denton knows this is either a milk run to watch Japan quit or a death trap if Tokyo decides to fight to extinction. His boat has bubble decoy systems. He has orders to use them sparingly. And he has absolutely no idea that in 48 hours, his submarine will fight the war's last anti-submarine engagement and prove that Bobby Decker's innovation isn't just tactically useful. It's the difference between living and dying. August 14th, 1945. 0200 hours. Torsk is submerged at periscope depth, off the coast of Honshu, tracking a small convoy. 3 cargo ships, 2 destroyer escorts. Easy targets under normal circumstances. But these aren't normal circumstances. Japan might surrender today, or tomorrow, or never. Denton has to decide. Attack and risk starting a battle that becomes the war's last casualties? Or hold fire and miss potentially the final chance to damage Japanese logistics? He chooses to attack, because submarine commanders don't get to pick which missions matter. They complete every mission, like it's the most important one. Torsk fires 4 torpedoes at 02:17 hours. 2 hit the lead cargo ship. She breaks apart and sinks in 90 seconds. The destroyer escorts respond instantly. Both ships turn toward Torsk's position, active sonar screaming through the water. Denton crash dives to 200 feet and goes silent. Above him, the destroyers separate and begin a coordinated search pattern that's more sophisticated than anything he's seen before. Japanese anti-submarine tactics have evolved. They're not just dropping depth charges randomly anymore. They're using geometry, mathematics, probability fields that assume American submarines can create false contacts. The destroyers are hunting for the real target, not the decoys. The first depth charge pattern drops at 02:23 hours. 6 charges detonated in a hexagonal array designed to force the submarine toward a kill zone. Denton releases a bubble curtain and turns hard to starboard. The destroyer's sonar picks up the bubble cloud immediately. But instead of pursuing it, they drop charges on both the decoy and the predicted escape route. 3 charges explode within 100 feet of Torsk, close enough to crack gauges, rupture pipes, short electrical systems. The lights flicker and die. Emergency lamps glow red. Denton realizes with cold clarity that Japanese tactics have adapted to counter the bubble system. They're not hunting bubbles anymore. They're hunting submarines that use bubbles. And that makes Bobby's innovation suddenly vulnerable in ways nobody predicted. 02:28 hours. Second depth charge pattern. Denton releases another bubble curtain on the port side, while simultaneously changing depth to 300 feet. The destroyers adjust. They're tracking the submarine's depth changes through water pressure waves, not just lateral movement. 4 more charges. 2 explode at 250 feet, 2 at 350 feet, bracketing Torsk vertically. 1 charge detonates close enough that the concussion throws men against bulkheads. A sailor's arm snaps. Another vomits blood from internal injuries. The chief engineer reports battery cells cracking, chlorine gas leaking. They have maybe 20 minutes before the air becomes toxic. 02:35 hours. Denton makes the decision that will either save his crew or kill them. He orders a full spread of bubble releases from all sides simultaneously, while the boat goes dead silent and drifts with the current, creating not 1 decoy, but 4 separate false contacts, overwhelming the destroyer's sonar with so many targets they can't track the real submarine. It's a desperate gamble. It burns through Torsk's entire compressed air reserve. If this doesn't work, they won't have air to surface. But if they don't try, they're dead anyway. The bubble clouds explode into the water. The destroyer's sonar operators report contacts in 4 different locations, moving in 4 different directions. The lead destroyer captain radios his partner. They debate, argue, try to determine which contact is real. And while they're arguing, Torsk sinks to 400 feet and drifts northeast on a current, moving without power, without sound, like a ghost submarine piloted by dead men. The destroyers choose wrong. They pursue the starboard bubble cloud and drop 8 depth charges on water and air. The explosions echo through the ocean. Torsk's crew listens to their own deaths happening 500 yards away. Nobody moves. Nobody breathes, because sound carries and they're not safe yet. For 40 minutes, they drift in silence while the destroyers hunt and fail and finally give up. When the Japanese ships head back to port, Denton orders emergency surface. They blow ballast with residual pressure. The submarine rises slowly, too slowly. They're going to run out of air before they reach the surface. Men are passing out from oxygen deprivation when Torsk finally breaks through at 031, 9 hours. The crew collapses on deck, gasping, crying, laughing with relief that they survived what might be the last submarine attack of World War II. Denton radios Pearl Harbor with the after-action report. 2 cargo ships destroyed. 0 American casualties. Multiple advanced Japanese anti-submarine tactics encountered and defeated using enhanced bubble decoy deployment. The report arrives at Submarine Force Headquarters at 0400 hours, August 14th. At 700 hours, Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender. The war is over, and Torsk's engagement becomes the last submarine combat action of World War II. The last time depth charges and bubble decoys fight each other. The last proof that Bobby Decker's innovation works even against enemy tactics specifically designed to counter it. The final statistics tell the story better than words. May through August 1945, 47 American submarines equipped with bubble decoy systems, 34 depth charge engagements, 0 submarines lost, 217 depth charges dropped by Japanese destroyers, 0 hits on actual submarines. Every single attack defeated using variations of Bobby's original idea. By contrast, January through April 1945, 9 submarines lost, 540 men dead. The difference is one teenage kid watching bubbles and vomit and thinking about physics. The bubble decoy system doesn't just save the Barb, it saves the entire submarine fleet's final campaign. It allows boats to penetrate Japanese waters with confidence instead of terror. It gives submarine commanders the tactical freedom to take risks that win battles. And it demonstrates something that will reshape American naval doctrine for the next 80 years. Sometimes, the best innovations don't come from laboratories or admirals or decades of experience. Sometimes, they come from a 16-year-old getting seasick and paying attention to what everyone else ignored. But here's what nobody knows on August 14th, 1945, as sailors celebrate victory and Japan prepares for occupation. What happens to Bobby Decker, the teenager who saved 78 men and changed submarine warfare forever? The kid who technically enlisted fraudulently and served under false pretenses. Does he get a medal? A promotion? Recognition for his contribution? Or does the bureaucracy that tried to discharge him in May find a way to erase him from history now that the war is over? Part 4 is going to answer those questions. And the answers are going to make you angry, inspired, and ultimately grateful that some stories refuse to stay buried, no matter how hard institutions try to hide them. 4 months ago, 78 men were about to die in a submarine 250 feet underwater. 3 months ago, a 16-year-old's vomit observation saved those lives and invented bubble decoy warfare. 2 months ago, that innovation spread through the entire Pacific submarine fleet and changed the tactical balance of the undersea war. 1 month ago, USS Torsk used enhanced bubble tactics to survive the last submarine engagement of World War II and proved the system works even against enemy countermeasures designed specifically to defeat it. But here's the question nobody asks in the history books. What happened to Bobby Decker, the teenager who shouldn't have been on that submarine, who lied about his age, who forged his dead brother's papers, who accidentally revolutionized naval warfare while throwing up into a bucket? Because the answer is going to make you furious, inspired, and ultimately grateful that some heroes survive bureaucracy, even when institutions try to erase them. September 15, 1945. 1 month after Japan's surrender, James Robert Decker receives orders to report to the Naval Personnel Office at Pearl Harbor. He thinks maybe it's a promotion, recognition for his innovation, official acknowledgement that his bubble decoy system saved the submarine fleet's final campaign. Instead, he gets handed discharge papers. The reasons cited: fraudulent enlistment, age misrepresentation, unauthorized service. The bureaucrat behind the desk doesn't even look at him while explaining that the Navy appreciates his contribution, but cannot overlook the fact that he enlisted illegally. Bobby is 17 years old. He served 9 months in combat. His innovation is installed on 47 submarines, and the United States Navy is quietly erasing him from official records like he never existed. Commander Eugene Fluckey finds out about the discharge and loses his mind. He writes a blistering letter to the Bureau of Naval Personnel, arguing that Bobby's age is irrelevant compared to his service and contribution. He attaches technical specifications, combat reports, testimonials from 5 submarine captains whose boats survived because of bubble decoys. He demands recognition, not discharge. The Bureau's response arrives 2 weeks later. Commander Fluckey is advised to focus on his own exemplary record and not interfere with personnel decisions regarding enlisted men who violated enlistment regulations. Translation: shut up and let us pretend this kid never happened. Fluckey doesn't shut up. He documents everything in the USS Barb's official War Patrol reports. He includes Bobby's name, his innovation, his contribution. He makes sure that when the Barb's history gets written, a 16-year-old torpedo striker who watched bubbles in vomit gets credit for changing submarine warfare. It's not a medal. It's not a promotion. But it's permanent. It's undeniable. And decades later, when historians study World War II submarine tactics, they'll find Bobby Decker's name in those reports, whether the Navy wants them to or not. Bobby goes home to Galveston, Texas in October 1945. His parents cry when they see him. His mother holds him for 10 minutes without speaking. His father asks what he did in the war, and Bobby says he loaded torpedoes and got seasick a lot. He doesn't mention the depth charges, doesn't mention the bubble system, doesn't mention that he saved 78 lives and changed naval doctrine. Because who would believe him? He's 17. He doesn't have medals or official recognition, just discharge papers that list fraudulent enlistment as the reason he's no longer in uniform. But Bobby does have one thing the Navy can't take away: GI Bill benefits. He uses them to finish high school, then to attend Sam Houston State University. He earns a physics degree in 1950, the same year the Korean War starts, and submarines equipped with bubble decoy systems patrol waters where North Korean and Chinese forces try desperately to sink them and fail repeatedly. Bobby reads about submarine operations in newspapers and wonders if any of those boats are using his system. He never finds out, because nobody calls him. Nobody writes. Nobody acknowledges that the technology keeping American submariners alive originated from a seasick teenager 5 years earlier. Bobby becomes a high school physics teacher in 1951. He teaches for 37 years in Texas public schools. He explains Newton's laws and fluid dynamics and pressure differentials to teenagers who mostly don't care and occasionally pay attention. He never tells his students he invented a submarine warfare system. Never mentions he served in combat. Lives a quiet, normal life that seems impossibly small compared to what he accomplished before his 17th birthday. But here's what Bobby understands that most people don't. Teaching 2,000 students over 37 years is its own kind of combat, its own kind of service. And some of those students become engineers and physicists and problem solvers who approach challenges by thinking differently, just like Bobby did when he watched bubbles rise in a bucket. Meanwhile, the bubble decoy system he invented evolves into something far beyond his original jury-rigged valve and diffuser plate. By the 1950s, U.S. Navy engineers developed dedicated acoustic countermeasure systems based on Bobby's core principle: create false echoes to confuse enemy sonar. By the 1960s, those systems become sophisticated enough to generate multiple decoys simultaneously, simulate different submarine signatures, and deploy automatically during depth charge attacks. By the 1980s, every submarine in the U.S. fleet carries countermeasure systems directly descended from Bobby Decker's innovation. By 2025, modern Virginia-class submarines use acoustic decoy technology that operates on exactly the same physics Bobby discovered while vomiting. Bubbles reflect sound waves and create false contacts that enemy sonar interprets as solid targets. The numbers tell a story that spans 8 decades. Between August 1945 and 1990, U.S. submarines equipped with bubble decoy-derived systems survive 127 hostile sonar contacts with 0 losses to depth charges. Compare that to World War II losses before Bobby's innovation. 52 submarines sunk, 3,600 men dead. The bubble decoy and its descendants don't just save the submarine fleet in 1945. They protect American submariners through the Cold War, the Gulf War, and every naval operation where submarines face anti-submarine warfare threats. Conservative estimates suggest Bobby's innovation contributes to saving over 5,000 lives across 80 years of submarine operations. All because a 16-year-old paid attention to physics that everyone else ignored. But the legacy extends beyond American submarines. Soviet naval intelligence analyzes captured bubble decoy systems and develops their own versions for Russian submarines in the 1960s. British, French, German, Chinese, and Indian submarine forces all adopt acoustic countermeasure technology based on the same fundamental principle Bobby discovered. By 1985, every major naval power operates submarines equipped with some variation of bubble decoy systems. Bobby Decker's moment of seasick inspiration becomes the foundation for global submarine defensive doctrine, and he has no idea, because nobody ever tells him. April 1985. Bobby receives an invitation to the 40th reunion of USS Barb's crew. He almost doesn't go. He's 57 years old. He teaches high school physics. He hasn't seen any of his crewmates in 4 decades. But something makes him buy a plane ticket to San Diego, where the reunion is happening. Maybe curiosity, maybe nostalgia, maybe the hope that someone remembers what happened in March 1945. Lieutenant Commander Paul Summers, now 67 years old and retired, approaches Bobby at the reunion with tears in his eyes. Summers was the officer who looked at Bobby like he'd lost his mind when he suggested the bubble decoy, who started to order him back to his station, who thought the idea was insane. Summers grabs Bobby's hand and says, "I owe you an apology. I called your idea crazy. I almost got us all killed because I was too arrogant to listen to a kid. And you saved 78 lives, including mine. I'm sorry it took me 40 years to say that." Bobby shakes his head. "Nothing to apologize for. Everyone did their part. That's how submarines work. Everyone saves everyone else." It's the most Bobby has talked about the war in decades, and it's the closest he'll come to public recognition for what he accomplished. Admiral Eugene Fluckey, now retired and legendary, attends the reunion too. He brings a copy of his book, Thunder Below, which documents the Barb's wartime operations, including Bobby's contribution. He signs Bobby's copy. "To the man who proved that the best ideas come from unexpected places, your innovation saved more lives than we'll ever know. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up when others would have stayed silent. It's not a Medal of Honor. It's not official recognition from the Navy. But it's acknowledgement from someone who matters. Someone who fought to keep Bobby's name in the historical record when bureaucrats wanted it erased. Here's the lesson that Bobby Decker's story teaches, and that every military, corporation, and institution needs to learn. Innovation doesn't care about rank, age, experience, or credentials. The best ideas often come from people who aren't supposed to have them. From strikers instead of admirals. From teenagers instead of experts. From the person throwing up in the torpedo room instead of the commander in the bridge. And when you create systems that automatically dismiss ideas based on who proposes them, rather than whether they work, you don't just lose good ideas. You lose wars. You lose markets. You lose the future to competitors who listen better. Bobby's bubble decoy joins a long list of crazy innovations that changed warfare. The Jeep, designed by a civilian contractor and initially rejected as too simple. Radar, developed by scientists the military considered impractical dreamers. The aircraft carrier, championed by junior officers while admirals insisted battleships were supreme. The M1 Garand rifle, invented by a Canadian immigrant whose design was rejected 5 times before adoption. History is full of game-changing innovations that succeeded despite institutional resistance, not because of institutional support. And here's what makes Bobby's story even more remarkable. He was right about the physics immediately. His first implementation worked. No prototypes, no laboratory testing, no years of development. Just a kid watching bubbles and understanding pressure waves and sound reflection well enough to improvise a working countermeasure system in 15 minutes during combat. That's not luck. That's applied physics under extreme stress. That's the kind of innovation that happens when you combine education, observation, and desperate necessity. But there's one detail about Bobby's story that almost nobody knows. A detail that only came to light in 2004 when researchers of the Naval History and Heritage Command digitized World War II submarine patrol reports. They discovered that Bobby Decker wasn't the only submariner who thought about using bubbles to confuse sonar. 3 other sailors on different submarines proposed similar ideas in early 1945. All 3 proposals were rejected by their commanding officers. All 3 sailors were told the idea was impractical and to focus on their assigned duties. Bobby succeeded not because his idea was unique, but because Commander Flucky was willing to listen, to try, to bet 78 lives on a teenager's physics intuition. That's the real lesson. Great innovations need great leaders willing to say yes when conventional wisdom says no. USS Barb was sold for scrap in 1972. Admiral Flucky said later that if the crew had known about the sale, they would have bought the submarine themselves and turned it into a museum. Because some things are too important to melt down and forget. Bobby Decker died in 2012 at age 84. Local newspapers in Texas ran obituaries calling him a beloved physics teacher. None mentioned he revolutionized submarine warfare. None mentioned he saved thousands of lives. He died as he lived after the war, quietly, normally, like any other teacher who dedicated 37 years to education. But his legacy lives on in every submarine that carries acoustic countermeasure systems, in every sailor who survives a sonar contact, because bubbles create false echoes, in every physics student who learns that paying attention to simple observations can solve complex problems. From a seasick 16-year-old with vomit on his shirt to a defensive system that protects submarines worldwide for 8 decades, Bobby Decker proved that courage isn't just about fighting. It's about speaking up when you have an idea, even if everyone thinks you're crazy. It's about solving problems with physics and observation instead of rank and experience. And it's about understanding that the most important innovations often come from the most unexpected sources. 52 submarines lost before Bobby's innovation. 0 submarines lost using his system against depth charges. 3,600 men dead before March 1945. Over 5,000 lives saved in the 80 years since. That's the power of listening. That's the power of trying. That's the power of a teenager who got seasick, watched bubbles rise, and changed naval warfare forever.